T.B.Photo X1.5 to FX, and welcome back to another video. And now, different. This is gonna be a little bit of a different video than what I'm used to doing. I've done some lists before and so on, but this is gonna be a little bit different because this is a wish list. Glass. The number one thing. The camera, yes, it's important, and so on, that you have a camera with the specs that you need for your type of photography, but even more important than the camera itself is the glass that you put on it. I can't start to number the amount of photographers that, if you look on YouTube or anything, any photographer that has a photography channel, they basically say the same thing, that glass, 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 to quote Jared Polman from T.B.Photo. And also, if you look at all of them, you know, if you go back to and look at my top YouTube photography channel, that video, you can see that almost all of those photographers, they talk about glass, that there is no point in having a camera body with a sensor that is X amount of megapixels, and you don't have quality glass to do it justice. For instance, I'm actually departing now. I'm not using my Vivitar Series 1 lens, the 19 to 35 on the D7200. Now I'm actually using the old AF Nikkor 35 to 135 millimeter at the 35 setting, and you have to do the math yourselves. The crop factor is of course 1.5 on the Nikon D7200, since it's an AF. It's a APS-C sensor camera. It has a bit of a crop factor, so it's 1.5 in this particular case. But anyway, I'm trying now to use a different lens, or a different lens on the camera itself, and so this particular video is filmed with a different lens that I'm used to see if the quality actually is better or worse. Everything here is a bit, you learn as you go. But anyway, this is my top 5 wish list lenses. So just a little bit of a specs. As you might know, I'm reading from a sheet for this, because it's a little bit of information you need to have in your, your mind at the same time. So bear with me if I'm looking down. It's just looking down on a piece of paper. So anyway, I'm using the Nikon D7200 on this, which unfortunately, this is just me being a little bit of an amateur futurologist here, but bear with me. I think that the D7200 is unfortunately the last we'll see in the Nikon line of the D7000 series, because honestly, any upgrade Nikon will do on the D7000 series of camera, that would basically be the D500. Am I right? I mean, the only real difference is that the D7200 has a built-in pop-up flash. The D500 doesn't have a built-in flash, but it does 4K, and it's basically a D5 with an APS-C sensor instead of the full frame sensor. But anyway, that's just my little thought about the future, that the D7200 is maybe the last iteration of the D7000 series cameras, because anything else, any kind of upgrade would basically turn the D7000 series into the D500. But that's just me. But now, let's go over the specs on this particular camera. As I said, it's an APS-C sensor camera, but it's still, apparently it's 24.2 megapixels. And the native ISO on this camera, the D7200, is 100 ISO up to 25,600. But it's pushable to 102,400. So it can go fairly high in ISO, but when you go up to those levels, it's basically unusable pictures. But still, a lot of reviewers I've listened to over the time I've used this camera say that this is actually quite good low light performing camera. But I feel I go about to a maximum of ISO 5000. After that, I'm not really that impressed. Well, I'm impressed with the results, but I think that the quality starts to go a little bit awry when you go over 5000, in my opinion. If you think that it's usable above 5000 ISO, that's your thing. But anyway, these are the 5 lenses that I would love to own. But 2 of them are kind of substitutes for each other. More about that when we get to them. But I'm just gonna go through a little bit what the lenses are, what they're supposed to be, and who made me aware of their existence, and a little bit general background. But anyway, let's start. The first one is an oldie but a goodie, a classic in its own right, in my opinion. It's the Nikkor AF Nikkor 105mm DC lens. The DC lenses were made in 2 iterations. Either it was the 105mm or the 135mm. Both were made as portrait lenses, but the DC part of the lens stood for defocus control. And what defocus control meant was that when you had put focus on your subject, you can use a secondary aperture ring to put the focus more to the foreground or more to the background. This was used very much by portrait photographers because the defocus control, which is a patent by Nikon, it actually makes the background have a more, you get more bokeh in the background for this lens. So it's a really great lens for portrait shoots where you want to pull more bokeh out of the background. So this is an old lens, because this is also a reason why the Nikon D7200 is a good match for this lens. Yes, it will become, it's 105mm, but you will get it it will become 152.5mm, 157.5mm lens instead when you use it on a crop sensor body. But anyway, the person that made me aware of this lens was actually Australian photographer Matt Granger, who did a bokeh shootout between a lot of lenses. I'm gonna put the link to that video in the description below. But anyway, that lens, it's a real beauty. A built-in lens hood, full metal design and so on. It needs the screw motor, the small flathead screw motor to operate the autofocus system. So that's why you need a camera body with the in-camera focusing motor for it to work to its full potential. Okay, next one is actually the substitute for the Nikkor 105 DC. It's the Venus Optics Lua 105mm f2 STF lens. I mean, this lens is a bit special because it has what is known. It has a. I'm just reading for this because this is a 4-letter word for you. This is adobization control. It's similar to the DC's defocus control, but the difference is that this lens makes the edges of the frame more out of focus. So instead of defocus control, it uses a controllable adobization lens. It's actually a separate element in the lens that actually makes it so it will defocus more in the edges. Or rather, it doesn't really defocus it, it more blurs out the edges optically. So it's a different type of system from the Nikon DC, and the guy who showed this to me was Christopher Frost Photography. I can also link in the below to his video as well. I mean, this guy is truly amazing for his weird lens reviews. Really recommended to see. But anyway, this lens is then this is also why you should use the D7000 series, or better if you want Nikon, because this lens, the Venus Optics, they are non-CPU lenses. There are no electronics in their lenses currently that I'm aware of. It might change in the future, but this lens, you need to actually program your camera so it's aware of the type of lens that is on the body, because there is no electronic connection between the lens and the camera. So that's a little bit of a drawback for this, the Venus Optics. But it seems to be a very cool, very sturdily built lens. Christopher Frost himself, I think this is the lens where he actually compares the built quality to more or less a Carl Zeiss build quality for this but this is a Chinese brand, Venus Optics. It's a Chinese brand, but it seems like it is a good brand for what they do. Okay, third on the list. This is the real, I mean, this is, what should we call it? This is the drain pipe. This is a real, this is a real stovepipe of a lens. It's the Sigma 105 to 600 millimeter contemporary. I mean, this lens is made for a full frame camera, but it's the first super zoom that is affordable to the consumer market, in my opinion. I mean, it is a variable aperture lens, so don't get me wrong, it's not one of these high-end extreme professional lenses, but it's still professional in a way. It's a consumer, even prosumer lens. This is, something that needs a lot of light and so on, but being that this is made for full frame, and it's in 105 to 600 millimeter for full frame, that means that it's a 225 to 900 millimeter lens for an APS-C, Nikon APS-C camera. These are also made for Canon, of course, since Sigma is a third-party lens manufacturer. The same goes for Venus Optics. But anyway, this lens, I think this is, for ornithology, bird photography, concerts when you're far back in the crowd, sports and other type of sporting activities. And also a really great thing with this lens from Sigma is its ability to be upgradable. If you buy to it the USB puck, that is basically a bayonet fitting for the lens, so you just put this, instead of having, it's like the rear lens cap. Instead of putting a rear lens cap on, you put this USB hub on the lens itself, and through your computer you can actually change the focusing range for this lens. So if you know that anything 14 meters and closer is non-usable because everything will be further away from you than 14 meters, you can actually program the lens to not go under 14 meters of focus. So that's a great bonus, because you can actually manipulate the focusing spectrum of the lens to make it faster for your application. So it's really great for being a programmable contemporary series lens from Sigma, and I would really love to have one of these, to have a real super zoom in my arsenal of lenses. It seems to be a good choice. But anyway, the guy who made me aware of this lens's existence and its potential is Philadelphia photographer Jared Poland. So, link in the description, as stated before. Now, next on the list, it's the Samyang 24mm tilt shift. I mean, a tilt shift lens can be seen a little bit as a novelty. I think if there are two lenses or lens types that are considered to be gimmicks, it basically is the tilt shift and the fisheye, which some photographers seem to shy away from and consider a little bit too much of a gimmick, but I think they still have their place. And the Samyang 24mm tilt shift, I mean, if you're doing architectural stuff, if you want to, take photos of buildings and so on, this is a great lens. And also, if you are, into, a little bit of a trick photography, if you want to, trick photo if you're up in a building and you want to shoot down on something and make it look like miniaturize, miniatures, the tilt shift is a brilliant lens to, acquire that effect where you get, the miniaturized look. So yeah, that's one of the lenses that I would really like to have, the Samyang tilt shift. And this is Matt Granger as well, who I think it was somewhere in Malaysia or somewhere in Asia at least, where he tested this lens on a couple of different buildings and so on. A link in the description. And now we actually are on the fifth and final lens on the list. And it's another Venus Optics or Lua lens. It's the 15mm wide-angle macro lens. I mean, this is actually a very new type of lens. I mean, macro photography has been around, and macro photography have also always been, this little, people say that it's not true macro, because the definition of true macro photography is a 1:1 scale reproduction on the sensor. So if something is 1 square centimeter in real life, it has to be reproduced as 1 square centimeter on the image sensor on the camera. But apparently this Venus Optics wide angle macro is capable of 1:1 reproduction. But it's a new type of macro lens, this, because it's wide angle. Normally traditional macro lenses, apparently have not been this wide angle. They've been very narrow angle. So I think Venus Optics took a little bit of a gamble designing this lens, because they didn't know if there was a legitimate market for it. So this lens, apparently it gives you great 1:1 macro on the subject, but it also gives you a nice background on the same image. So kudos for that, and that's why it is an interesting lens. This is also unfortunately a non-CPU lens, so you need to program your camera again. It's no autofocus at all. I can say that the Samyang tilt shift, the Venus Optics, and both the Venus Optics and the Samyang, none of them are autofocus, so they're all manual, complete manual lenses, and non-CPU lenses. But this was also Christopher Frost photography that made me aware of this lens. And this lens also have a shift function in the lens, so you don't get a distorted perspective when you take your wide-angle macro shots, because apparently it became a necessity in order to, not have the distorted perspective. The shift function of a lens, if you take an analogy then from architectural photography, if you have a vantage point that is very low to the ground and you're photographing up on a building, it will seem like the building is falling over. And you can see that you have a converging line where the sides of the building narrows as it goes towards the top of the structure. Okay, a little bit of a jump cut. I know this is starting to become a little bit of a rambling video from now, but anyway, we're on the last lens, so bear with me, please. Okay, the Venus Optics wide-angle macro photography lens, well, there is actually a little bit of a hidden feature in this lens as well, and that is that it has a shift function in the lens itself, so you can shift the focusing point depending on the subject you're photographing. Because the thing is, and I think this is something that Venus Optics found out during product testing, they must have, because when you're focusing, photographing with this type of lens, and also in some other, specialty lenses, you have the function that your perspective becomes a bit distorted, or rather, for instance, you have a little bit of a distorted barrel distortion and so on when you focus, photographing with a fisheye, for instance. So in order to combat a lot of different types of photography anomalies, like in architectural photography, we're in a bit of with the Samyang tilt shift. Imagine when you take a photograph of a building and you have a low vantage point, and you're looking up your perspective from a low point, and you're photographing up on a building, you will actually have a vantage point way above where you're located. So the sides of the buildings will basically be like converging lines, and it will be like the building becomes narrower and narrower for the top. And that's a piece of the puzzle why in some picture it seems like buildings are falling over when you take architectural photography. And that's where tilt shift technology comes in. It will actually correct those types of anomalies. And apparently when you have a wide angle macro lens, that shift function will actually help to straighten out distortions in this type of wide angle macro photography. And that's at least my thoughts about it. That's my prediction. But anyway, that was my list of 5 lenses that I would love to own. That's my wish list. But now I would like to hear from you, dear viewer. What's your wish list of lenses that you would love to own and use in your photography? So post a comment down below and tell me. But anyway, this is Tobias Bergström from T.B.Photo X1.5 and I would like to see you guys in the next video. And as you're supposed to say in this YouTube malarkey, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.